slowly and, oh, 1 second here. Got it. Oh, did that mess up the, let's see, perfect. So again, if I am hard to hear for whatever reason, please interrupt. I want to make sure this information is as digestible as possible. And I am also making sure I'm getting plenty of electric lights. So I feel good. I just sound a little gravelly. But yeah, I am the food waste reduction lead at the Washington State Department of Ecology. Really excited to be here today. And thank you so much for the time. I'm here to present the Use Food Well Washington plan and to talk about how we are going to be moving into the 2030 food waste reduction goals as a state and how we can all work together to meet those goals. So to begin, I am coming at you as one individual today, but it's so important to understand the collaborative nature of the work that has happened to this point. I'll just skip to the bottom of the, I love pictures. And so if you look at the bottom, you'll see all the logos of the agencies we worked with. Ecology did partner in total with 5 agencies, or with 4 other agencies for 5 agency partnerships total to create this Use Food Well Washington plan. So you'll see the Department of Health, the Office of Superintendent of Public Instruction, the Washington State Department of Commerce, and the Washington State Department of Agriculture all played a critical role in making sure that we move this law into action in a way that made sense for the entire food system of Washington. In addition, we had essential plan requirements in the law that you'll see at the top of the slide, in addition to an independent analysis of Washington food flows. And all of this culminated into the work that laid the foundation for the planning process. And I do apologize, these are very wordy slides, but I'll take a moment to pause and get a sip here if you don't mind just reading through these to understand the definitions we're working under with food waste and wasted food. Excuse me. All right. Oh, my bug is not going away. I'm so sorry. All right. We should be good. And so here are the 3 strategies. Oh my goodness. Here, let me go on mute. Excuse me. So here, oops. Here are our 3 strategies: prevention, rescue, and recovery. Just for the sake of my voice, I'll pause and let you read them as well. Prevention, of course, is our critical, most priority strategy, followed by rescue and recovery. And I promise the wordy slides will end after this one. All right, I'm back at it, folks. And so one thing to notice with these strategies is they all help lay into the goals that we now have as a state. The Washington goals in alignment are now aligned with global, national, and regional goals to reduce food waste by 50% by 2030. Goal 1 is to reduce food waste generated by 50% by 2030. And goal 2 is to reduce at least half of edible food waste by 2030. It's important to note that generated means disposed food waste and recovered food waste. So we acknowledge that food waste is a bit of a lemon of an issue. So we thought we'd have some fun with some infographics. You'll see goal 1 here, reduce food waste generated by 50% by 2030, is illustrated by the 2015 baseline data. In the 2015 baseline data, excuse me, my voice has decided to fade here. We have generated just over 1 million tons of food waste. And what that means is that's an annual figure. And to meet the 2030 target, we will have to reduce just over 500,000 tons of that food waste generated, which is quite a lofty goal. Moving on to goal 2, we have the reduction of at least half of edible food waste by 2030. So now we're taking this baseline and moving into a little bit more of a granular view. You'll see that we have recovered food waste, inedible food disposed, and the tons of edible food waste disposed being just under 400,000 tons. This is just incredibly unacceptable as you think about the impacts of the coronavirus pandemic and how important food security is in our state. And so we see this as a critical goal to address along with goal 1. And with that, we would have to meet the 2030 goal by reducing at least or just under 200,000 tons of that edible food waste. And here's what the data shows us as far as how we can meet that goal in a way that makes sense with goal 1 and goal 2 as they interlay. We are excited to get more data as we have been able to hire a few more data experts onto our team recently. So we are on track, but we have a long ways to go. So the planning process, as you can imagine, those foundational elements really created an opportunity to engage with experts across the food system. And so we have 5 state agencies working under 5 working groups across that system, including over 100 experts. I think at one time we had 180 subject matter experts participating with us. It was pretty incredible to see, especially in the wake of the coronavirus pandemic, how everyone still saw the importance of this planning process and committed to helping. And in turn, we have 30 recommendations. I'll take another sip here so I don't have another panic at you. All right. So here we have the 30 recommendations to meet the 2030 food waste reduction goals. And so these can be easily summarized through 5 summary categories, including federal policy, state policy, funding, public education, and infrastructure. And we'll get into those in a minute. I just love our Cal graphic. And again, many thanks to everyone who helped make this a reality. So before we get into the recommendations themselves, I think it's really important to highlight the environmental, social, and economic benefits of when we reduce food waste and wasted food. And so for the Use Food Well Washington plan, in an ideal scenario where all the recommendations are implemented together, we do have the opportunity to go ahead and reduce food waste generated by over 1.3 million tons. And this means, if you can remember the previous graphic, according to our 2015 baseline, we go ahead and address food waste in the state. Excuse me. And then this also means, actually, Mary, are you on the call right now? Are you able to unmute?
Yes, I'm here.
Do you mind taking the speaking over? I'm just having such a coughing fit.
Oh, well, sure.
I'm so sorry. I don't know what's wrong, but I'm glad to move the slides for you. If you don't mind just letting me catch my breath a little.
Okay.
If not, I'll just go ahead and go on mute real quick and just.
Yeah, go. I'll do it and pipe in when I miss something. Yeah. So the plan includes information about the environmental benefits, the economic benefits, and the social benefits. So some of the environmental benefits are the massive reduction in the amount of food going for disposal can result in a large reduction in the greenhouse gases generated, which is, of course, the underlying motivation for a lot of this, besides feeding people, is also to reduce our greenhouse gas emissions from landfills. And also that the US EPA WARM model shows that that much reduction is equivalent to powering over 300,000 homes annually. So it's a better use of energy. Next slide. And the social benefits, sorry, my nose is running. The Use Food Well Washington plan, the benefits, let's see. If we can reduce the edible food waste by 295,000 tons per year, we'll be able to divert that food to a lot more beneficial locations, such as feeding hungry Washingtonians that have been impacted by COVID. And we're also already impacted by, unemployment and other things like that that make food harder to get for some people. Next slide. And the economic benefits. This is one that a lot of people are very much interested in understanding, is that our lead economist, Kasia Petora, did an excellent job of using a lot of resources to crunch the numbers on the economics. And while it looks like it will be fairly expensive, the return on investment is $4 for every dollar spent. So, which works out to be over $1 billion that Washingtonians can save. And this is in areas such as reduced waste bills and better inventory. And it crosses all the spectrums on ways that we can save money while doing good things for the environment and feeding people. Next slide. All right, the non-market benefits are some of the things that I was just talking about, that we can feed people, we can teach people how to do a better job of managing their food residuals. And when you do that, maybe you also get an idea of how much food you're really wasting, so that it prompts changes further up the line, which is one of the things that we are really hoping to get people to understand, that we really don't want to have to manage this stuff. We'd really rather not make the waste in the first place, make sure all the food's getting eaten, or if it's not worth eating, then to go ahead and turn it into something beneficial. Next slide. And this is just a reminder, the Use Food Well Washington Plan, Appendix E, is all the economic information that was generated by Kasia. And this is a snapshot of the overall benefits. And you can see that while there are cumulative annual costs that look a little eye-watering, when you see the annual net benefits, when you see the ratio, that's where you see the 4-to-1 return on investment that we have identified. And then also that you get an idea of the greenhouse gas reduction and avoided social carbon issues that will change every year. But I highly encourage you to look at Appendix E to get Kasia's full snapshot. Next slide. And we worked really hard to make sure that the plan was easy to read, that people would find it enjoyable and informative. And this is just a couple of tips to help you understand that we created food sector icons, so that if you're just interested in how it impacts farmers or retail businesses or schools, you can basically run through the plan, through the 30 recommendations. And as you can see from this example of number 25, the top icon lets you know that this particular recommendation does cover prevention, rescue, and recovery. And then it also lists the industries that are impacted by this particular recommendation. So it makes it a little bit easier. If you don't care about something, you can just flip on and find the ones you care about. And we hope that will make it easier to read. Next slide.
Well, thank you, Mary. I think I've recovered. I'm willing to give it another try now that I've gotten
great.
some.
Let me know if you need me. I'm here.
Well, and bless you. Mary is our organics lead, and she's the second author. And honestly, Mary, maybe I don't. I'm getting another coughing fit started. Do you mind just taking this over?
Sure enough.
I'm so sorry, everyone. All right, I'm going to go on mute. Please continue. I'm not sure what's happening right now, but thank you, Mary.
Pollen. That's
it has to be. I'm in the allergy zone. So, all right. Thank you, Mary.
Sure. Next slide. So we're going to run through the recommendations very quickly. As you can see, the federal policy recommendations are very high level. We got this feedback from our subject matter experts that these were the things that they thought that would have better bang for the buck at the federal level, including updating the Bill Emerson Good Samaritan Food Act so that people really do understand that they have liability protection when they donate food. Supporting a national date labeling standard, which has been a real problem because we have such a scattershot of date labeling across the country that people are confused, and they often throw away perfectly good food just because it says Best Buy, which means, yeah, it may not be as good as in the next few days as when it was in peak freshness, but it's still good to eat. Increasing markets for lower grade or imperfect produce. We found that a lot of perfectly edible food doesn't look good or doesn't have the right appearance, so it gets plowed under or sent to disposal. And then improving federal income tax, especially for farmers, to help their to get some reimbursement when they donate food. Next slide. Now, the state policy recommendations include creating the Washington Center for Sustainable Food Management and these other recommendations. And I'm happy to report that House Bill 1799 has established the creation of the center, and underneath that umbrella, we will be able to direct a lot of our attention to these particular partnerships that we have already developed, and also to improve inside the state relationships to organizations such as WSDA and the Conservation Commission. And for researching strategies to develop partnerships is something that we definitely want to help. We would rather do something cooperatively than legislatively. So that's our first try. Next slide. State policy recommendations continue improving regulatory certainty for organic management facilities. There's been a lot of change over the past few years with different impacts to how organics are managed, including the apple maggot rule that restricts movement of raw organics, and also air regulations for compost facilities. So we're working on that, but we want to improve the regulatory certainty for these facilities because we're going to have to expand or establish new ones. And then developing an emergency food distribution and the 20-minute seated lunch. These following four are being managed by the Office of the Superintendent of Public Instruction and have a lot of support. And so within the school system, we see a lot of efforts to reduce any food waste coming out of schools. Next slide. Funding recommendations, dedicating state grant funding to statewide food waste reduction. Currently, food waste reduction applications have to compete with other recycling and household hazardous waste grant applications. So we thought we needed to have a dedicated state fund for food. And then we heard loud and clear from the Department of Health that they are understaffed. And if there's going to be any more effort for the the Department of Health to come in and work with food waste prevention, that they're going to definitely need more help and financial and employees. And then we heard from the local governments that while they're very interested in doing food waste reduction, they're impacted by lack of funding. So we're working on all these things, and then building a farm to school partnership will help students understand where food comes from, how it looks when it grows naturally, that they don't always come out to be perfectly looking like we see in the stores. And we hope that that will bring up a whole generation of kids who are a little more in touch with where food comes from. Next slide. Whenever you want to jump in, Jade, let me know.
Well, I'm nervous to do it because I feel fine again, but then once
okay,
I get started,
do this one. Do this one because you love this slide.
You know, I do, but I am very nervous. So I will just do this one and give it back to you. For some reason, there's this major tickle in my throat since we got started. So public education is really exciting. You know what, Mary, I'm just going to give it to you because it's bubbling back up again. I am really surprised by this. So
okay, no worries.
Yeah, thank you.
We the public education recommendations, we have two of them, and they are related to, this is not school related, it's doing our public campaigns, and they are related to food waste reduction, which is helping people understand how not to make it in the first place. And then the second one is to reduce contamination when food is put into the curbside cart, for example, that it doesn't have the plastic bag the food came in, or plastic containers, or the bread tie, or any of that kind of stuff. And the example that Oregon, our neighbor, has done a lot of outreach and work with their public to get the message that resonates. And this is really important because sometimes we think we know the answer, and then when we do public outreach, we find out it's not the answer we thought. And this is the one that the public said they responded to. I'm a bad apple. Basically, you're throwing money away when you throw away the apple. And we are going to cooperate with them to make sure that we have developed our campaign with the same kind of understanding of what's going to resonate with the public.
And I will just pop in real quick and highlight that we are working on $1 million food waste reduction campaign supporting both of these recommendations. But you're doing amazing, Mary. I don't know how I could have done this without you. So I will stop and let you just finish us. We have about somewhere between 5 and 7 minutes, if you don't mind.
Okay, and then the infrastructure development are the ones where we had the most recommendations because we have a lot of work to do. We need to understand how food moves around the state, both edible food and food waste, because if there's a better way to use the food waste, such as through some process to turn it into energy or animal food or something, we need to have a better understanding of how that works. But then there's also improving food donation transportation. Cold chain management is a really big deal. If we can get more cold chain around the state to store things until the opportunity is available to move it. For example, we had a bunch of apples go bad a few years ago when the port went on strike. If we had some more cold chain management, we might have been able to help preserve those apples. And then building more community food hubs. And then you can go to the next slide. And then value-added food processing. Both of these are designed to take the ability to convert food into more manageable sizes and turn funky looking tomatoes into salsa. All these things are designed to help, especially the more rural communities or the smaller farmers, to get their product out into the market. And also we saw with COVID that there was huge containers of food that couldn't be divided up very easily to give to individuals. And this would be another way for to take those large packages and put them into smaller containers. Infrastructure investment in Washington schools includes having more opportunity for schools to, for example, make their own food in the school, or to have dishwashers or milk dispensers rather than cartons. And then the last ones are about anaerobic digestion, to have more ability to use anaerobic digestion, and to diversify food waste management systems, to take it out of these large centralized management systems and maybe spread it around the state a little bit more into smaller abilities like community composting or small scale anaerobic digestion. As exampled on Vashon Island, they have a small scale anaerobic digester, and they're using tofu waste to make energy and create fertilizer that they can use on site. Next slide. And then it's pretty easy. This is an issue we definitely all have an opportunity to make an impact on, and we're going to be getting our data tracking better established, and we're going to be able to track progress, and we're going to be hiring people. So please pay attention when you see those job notices, because we finally are going to be able to really crank up the number of staff we have working on this, and to implement the Use Food Well Washington plan. And you can use this link to find our plan on the webpage, and or join our email.
I think, Mary, I dare say I can take the baton now.
Yeah.
I am literally, for public speaking, this is a first for me. So I just want to give you like a round of applause for me personally. You just hopped in without any notice. You're incredible. And I am not sure what happened to me, but I will make sure to put the webpage link in the email list in the chat. And just to bring us on home, you'll see Mary's info. She, like 5 stars to her, mine, and then Kasha, our economist who helped write the plan. And again, thank you so much, Mary. And thank you so much, everyone who helped participate in creating this plan. It's really an exciting opportunity for Washington. And I'll stop maybe sharing there so we can get some questions.
I have one question for you. I did farm to school work in Whatcom County for many years, and I just loved seeing all the references to school food and school food waste, and the ways you're going to be addressing that are in the plan. That's very exciting, and your partnership with OSPI. And I just was thinking about where one of the big hurdles was for us in Whatcom County, and that was that our many communities in many of the towns in our county don't have compost pickup. Food, like we have in Bellingham, food plus curbside food waste pickup. And that served all the schools in Bellingham, all 22 schools. However, when you get out to the further towns in the county, they didn't have that kind of service. And so they did not do food waste collection in their cafeterias. It all went in the garbage. And I'm just wondering about how, whether there's a focus on trying to get that curbside pickup and school-based pickup of food waste more widespread. That's part of the plan. I might have missed it. I just.
No, there's a lot going on there. No, infrastructure is a big element to being able to have schools do this work. I'll briefly answer, and then Mary, if you want to hop in. There's an infrastructure recommendation specifically for schools and institutions to get what you're talking about, whether it's actual cafeterias to do the localized food prep, or perhaps it's getting milk dispensers. We partnered with the Dairy Association. You'll see there's a Use Food Well Washington story talking about milk dispensers in schools to help not only reduce food waste, but carton waste as well. So that reduces hauling fees. But we do see a critical need for infrastructure development in schools because of what you're talking about. The single serving meals are definitely an issue when it comes to material management, in addition to food waste. Mary, do you want to highlight anything else that I might have missed?
Yeah, I was going to just pop in with House Bill 1799 has a lot of collection requirements for counties, for local governments, and that might impact that question that you're asking. There are caveats within that bill that exclude population centers and, you know, small populations, and but that might help with that question. But the other thing that's really interesting, as Jade pointed out, is, you know, practicing food waste prevention, food rescue, you know, having food rescue tables, but also it's a good opportunity maybe to establish relationships with a local farmer and maybe have school composting. I know that takes so much work and it's really difficult for teachers. I totally get it. I've been doing this for a long time, but every once in a while you find a situation where you have a teacher who's really interested in doing it and is able to come in the summertime when nobody is around. But there's also vermicomposting. I mean, it's a real good opportunity for education and teaching kids things. And I know it's really tough, but that's what we're looking at. It's kind of like a, you know, not necessarily always shifting it off to collection to take it somewhere, but maybe teaching, using it as a teaching opportunity.
And Mary, I will just say you did a really
Hey,
good
Mary.
job. Oh, so,
Oh, I was just gonna ask what that House bill was. I'm sorry to interrupt. I just wanted to capture it.
I'll give you the full title. It's Extended Second Substitute House Bill 1799. It's a whopper and it just passed, and it has a lot of requirements in it, and a lot of requirements about collection for businesses and residents of organics.
Excellent. Thank you.
and just super kudos to Mary. I think when she was presenting, she did a great job of highlighting the double benefit of having this infrastructure in schools. Not only are you managing food residuals on site or getting adequate produce and nutrients to kids on site, but then they take that education home, and then all of a sudden they're a steward of food waste reduction information within their local communities. And so we see a huge benefit when we target our school systems for food waste reduction.
Thank you. And we have a couple of questions in the chat. The first one is, how was the 2015 baseline number reached? How was that data captured?
Sure. Yeah, I'm reading the rest of that question too, and that's exactly a big issue at the state level. The data is limited, and the best we can say now is that we have gathered existing state level data for the 2015 baseline. It mostly includes the waste characterization studies we have, but also includes collected information from anaerobic digesters, composters, and some food rescue. You can get more of that in the data section of the Use Food Well Washington plan, and I did put a link to the webpage in the chat. And I will say there's also recommendations focused on getting more data, especially upstream, for prevention and rescue purposes.
Thank you. And then we had the question from Jay, are there technologies that are being used or planned to be used that assist with the tracking of food and the environment where the food is stored and transported through the supply chain?
I would say yes. I will answer this briefly. I bet Mary has some more color to add than I have. The tricky part is standardizing measurement. So a big thing we're learning from ReFed, and I can put a link in the chat for this group, it's rethinking food waste through economics and data, are that a lot of organizations are tracking and measuring food waste, which is a good thing, but perhaps they're using different categories in different ways of tracking. So we look at hunger relief as a good example of this. If a grocery retail goes ahead and donates X amount of pounds to a hunger relief organization, but much of that in that instance is contaminated, then if you're just tracking pounds, are you really tracking then food rescued? Because if it can't be used and sent to people for food security purposes, and instead it's still going to the landfill, but in an indirect way, we struggle to see the benefit of just measuring pounds. And so I would say that there's a lot of great technologies out there. And one thing I look forward to, especially with the leadership of ReFed, is standardizing effective measurement to make sure that we are doing effective targeting and measuring an impact of the work that we're doing. Mary, do you want to add anything to that question?
Just that the very fact that we have recommendations in there on this exact topic is the reason that we acknowledge that we have technology out there, but we're not using it consistently. So that's what we're hoping, that the center will help facilitate finding the technologies that are going to work best, and also so we can start doing a better job of tracking how food moves around the state and food waste.
That's great. Thank you. And then question from Caitlin is, do you have guidance for local organizations looking to support and help implement these state level recommendations?
Well, I also want to thank Caitlin. They sent me some empathy during my coughing fit and said this happened to them in a different, sorry to call you out, Caitlin, but I really appreciate the empathy. We all get it sometimes. And so thank you for being a human. I encourage you just to go ahead and look through the Youth Food Well Washington plan. Those icons Mary mentioned in the helpful slide are really a good way to see how you can fit into this greater state effort. Local organizations have a huge role to play when it comes to actually measuring and targeting food waste reduction opportunities in our state. And to Mary's point, recommendation 5 is going to be implemented, creating the Center for Sustainable Food Management. And so with that, we hope to support and facilitate more collaboration.
Okay.
We have also been tasked with developing some guidance. So that's all, all on the table for what we've got to do, because we've got to work with the Department of Health on how we help restaurants understand and grocery stores understand how they can either donate food or not make as much. So yeah, these are all things that are on the table for us to develop.
What's the time frame?
By 2030.
We have to reach these goals by 2030, but HB 1799 put a little bit more of a crunch on there for edible food diversion of 20% by 2025. And 75% of all organics, just to confuse the heck out of everybody.
It's crazy.
75% of all organics reduction by 2030. So not only the 50% reduction in food, like I said, you start throwing out all these percentages, it gets kind of crazy. But the House Bill 1799 also established that the Center for Sustainable Food Management will be operational by January 1, 2024. So that is going to help our timeline on delivery a lot. So that was good.
Yeah, thanks, Mary. I think one thing we could probably see in the next year is a better infographic on how those goals relate. We're currently discussing that in addition to the timelines and how they all intersect.
Yeah, that'd be really great. Let's take the other question from Jay, which is, to what level does the program focus on and track carbon footprint and reduction of food and food waste?
I'm right there with you, Jay. I think there's a huge intersection here between our climate goals and the resilient future that we need and food waste reduction. You'll see the social cost of carbon is accounted for within the Youth Food Well Washington plan. And that is a cool way to where we not only show that there's an economic benefit to food waste reduction, but a resilience factor in that the more we act now, the better prepared we are in paying less than we would in the future as a reactive stance. And then just to put a pin in this from my perspective and to give Mary some time to talk about it, if you want to add anything, Mary, I just attended the ReFed Food Waste Summit, and there was an interesting section on there about the Vera project creating a food waste carbon credit. And I do think that's going to be a very exciting opportunity to create that intersection, especially as we look at the Climate Commitment Act and what we are doing within like the air quality and other programs in ecology. That could give us a real leg on being able to quantify food waste reduction when it comes to climate and carbon footprint. you want to add anything, Mary? I know that was kind of all over the place. No? All right.
Jay just added to the question about down there, when will carbon guidelines turn to compliance?
You know, Jay, I think a big thing we're realizing with food waste reduction is that regulations don't serve us as much as public-private partnerships. And so we see food waste reduction actually measurably happening from all of our research through proactive partnerships, just because they're more nimble. I don't have a good answer as far as carbon guidelines and compliance go, but as the solid waste management program, we are approaching this more from a public-private sector partnership, and you'll see that through the Center for Sustainable Food Management. We are going to have working groups working together to address issues across the food system. So I know that's a kind of a wobbly answer, but I will say we are, besides the work that's in 1799, we are really prioritizing working together ahead of any sort of new rules. Mary, do you want to add anything from 1799 or?
No, I think you covered it. I think, the point is that we are blazing new trails here. So all this data management is all very new stuff, and we're all hitting the ground running, but we don't quite have it yet.
I will say, just to maybe put a pin in what Jay's asking, Ecology is hiring a more liaison position right now that might be able to help iron out some of these questions from solid waste and air quality. There's so much intersection even beyond food waste, it seems, between material management and how we address the climate. And I'm anticipating that position will help bridge the gaps between our programs a bit better. And that was just released a few weeks ago.
I just want to invite people to feel free to just jump in. You could raise your little hand signal or just speak right up if you have any additional questions. I'm not seeing any in the chat, so I'm just going to throw one in here that I've just been wondering about. I'm sure it's probably in the plan, which I have not read yet, but what do you think are the biggest sources of food waste? I know you focused on schools, and so I'm assuming you see that as a big source, but is it mostly schools and other institutions, or what are on farm, or what do you feel are the biggest sources?
I think it's great that you did ask this, Marty. We understand food waste is generated across the food system, and it's simply that there's no one singular food waste generator in Washington. As we especially conducted our economic analysis, that it wasn't a predominant factor. Of course, we have the divide between residential and commercial, but we really all need to use food well in order to meet these 2030 goals. It's pretty incredible how even split a lot of the generation can be, especially when we look across what we would maybe assume would be predominant food waste generators. And then as we conducted our research, and looked deeper into the food system, there's so much opportunity to target and measure and act from start to finish when we look from producers to plate. There was an independent analysis of food flows conducted early on that had some interesting indicators, but I will say, and I can try to get that link in the chat, or Mary, I don't know if you have the link to that commerce study. No, and it is pretty antiquated at this point. I will say it's not the leading information just because it was done right at the onset of the pandemic, but there were some indicators there. But once we started peeling back that, even we found that there's not one singular answer when it comes to food waste generated in Washington. And you do see that in our data from residential to commercial.
And I'll just jump in real quick and say that Washington does a waste characterization study every 5 years. And it was very interesting to see the one that we just published that was done during COVID, and how it really kind of flipped the generation because of so many restaurants and commercial establishments not being operational. So it's definitely something we're looking at, but we also want to figure out there's all kinds of ways to not make food waste, and we want to make sure we're giving people plenty of education on that front, as well as how to collect it and manage it properly. But let's figure out how not to make it in the first place.
That's so interesting
Amy?
what you just observed, or what the study observed about how things changed during COVID. What I think I'm seeing is more food waste because of all the takeout food, that all the containers that restaurants had to use when people switched to doing more carry out.
Well, Marty, wouldn't that align, or Mary, wouldn't that align with what the recent waste characterization study? Yeah, so we saw, instead of the predominant generator being the commercial sector, we actually saw residential sector increase to be in the predominant, because we really have a limited data focus, so it is commercial or residential or self-haul. So seeing that flip though, and having it be so striking really is going to inform us, who do we need to talk to now in this new normal, and how do we prevent in these new scenarios like you're highlighting?
Bill, I
I
see. your
also
hand.
noticed,
Sorry.
oh, sorry. No, did somebody else have a hand up?
Yeah, Bill and then Mike.
Okay.
Yeah, so having up until recently been a manager in a local health jurisdiction, I dealt with solid waste and a lot of issues dealt with food. And I agree, the schools were the #1 topic that came to our office, but in kind of what I'm doing now, I work for the Port Chehalis, and so I keep this in mind, but a lot of the times here, and I used to work for Lewis County, so we had a lot of problems with, for whatever reason, storage facilities that had food had problems with it. And a problem that we had up until then is, so yeah, they were mandated to get rid of a lot of food for whatever the reason was, and there really wasn't a viable way to do it. They didn't want it to go through the transfer station, or that was our only option, and get shipped someplace else. Well, fortunately, it looks like we have some composting facilities coming online here, going through the permitting process, and they're even planning on expanding even after the initial construction. So that's good news for us here in our local area. But, I also got to say the things we got the biggest complaints about food waste was over acceptance of food through food banks that went to waste. And even sometimes restaurants, we had a lot of staff inspecting restaurants, and the people who did try to do it right by composting usually had a lot of neighbors complaining because of whatever, birds trying to get into the compost bins. So I guess where I'm kind of going with that is that's something that the state Department of Health and local health jurisdictions, in my opinion, I think that's something, there's a lot of ways to get together to help move the things you're trying to move forward with. So, but from my standpoint now, as an operations manager for the port, I would like to know that, I can't think of any in our area, but when it comes to a point where they have something they got to get rid of, we want to do it the right way. They want to make sure there's a direct line in a timely manner to help get their issue resolved. So make it so it's not a problem. So.
Yeah, I think you're highlighting using food well, Bill, and doing the best by what food product you might have, whether it could be rescued or recovered. I know Mary would have a lot more to share, and maybe that's the next presentation for Lunch and Learns, is the 1799 focused one. We are in the throes of trying to figure that out as an agency on what this looks like from a timeline perspective. And ultimately, you're hitting on a lot of points that were brought up in 1799. And I don't know if you just want to add some color to that, Mary, or say to be continued.
I would just say that, again, those are some of the recommendations to improve transportation, to improve food donation transportation, to really understand we have a pretty loosey-goosey system that isn't well knitted together. And that's what we would like to do with this data, is to figure out how to knit this all together so we have a more efficient system.
A lot of people.
Yeah, focused on quality, maybe perhaps versus quantity. And that comes down to the issue then of measurement. Because as we look at what you shared as an example with like the hunger relief organizations, we don't want them to become the next disposal. We want them to have viable food to give out to their constituents. And so I think as we orient towards quality and making sure our measurement systems reflect that, that'll go a long way along with the recommendations that Mary highlighted.
Thank you. Mike, you have a question, comment?
Yeah, will you, and pardon me if I'm asking you to repeat yourself, will you remind me how this was funded and when you started working on it? Yeah,
so the Use Food Well Washington plan, and I can put the RCW in the chat, that came from a unanimously passed bill in the 2019 legislative session. And what I think, to hit on your point of funding, if we wouldn't have had the required FTE time from the other state agencies, I don't think it would have been as successful. And so I think that's a huge lesson learned for us, is having required time with our 4 other agency partners allowed for us to get their stakeholders in the room. Now, we didn't, of course, have FTE time for all of the subject matter experts. So that's a huge coalition there that we need to thank and really appreciate. But at the same time, that state agency partnership created real actionable recommendations instead of maybe ecology having to try to do a full food system glance by ourselves. And so that was, I'll put the bill in the chat that came from. And then Mary's talking about a separate one that I'm wondering if you want to put that in the chat as well, Mary, the most recent legislation.
Yeah, I can do that. And I just wanted to say that we were charged. The bill was originally proposed in 2018. It didn't pass. It passed in 2019, and they did not extend the deadline for delivery. And then COVID hit. So while we were asked to deliver it by 2020, we just couldn't do it. And we're so glad we had the grace period to wait to get through 2021, because we think it's a much better document, because we had such good cooperation from our agencies and our stakeholders to help us develop it. So yeah, we took a little bit longer than they told us, but they also didn't give us an extended date when they passed the bill.
Mary, I
so.
repressed that. I forgot all about that problem.
Yeah,
really
so,
good point though. Thank you.
I can certainly appreciate that. And I'm very curious when you do get the data in. I think it may be a bit of a mixed blessing. I think that the closure of restaurants and schools may provide some incredibly valuable data when you fill in that gap, right? Like what it happened in real time, and you could see, or at least maybe extrapolate what some of those effects are. I think really looking forward to hearing more as this evolves. I did want to tie it back to infrastructure, if only for a minute. And you obviously have a great group of stakeholders, and I love hearing about the private-public partnerships and how you're moving forward. And a brilliant list identifying some of those infrastructure projects that would have a profound impact on reducing food waste. Could you touch, if only briefly, on how you might move forward prioritizing those, or pardon me, what the future of that infrastructure, of those infrastructure development proposals might look like?
Yeah, I think that's really the call to action this year. We are currently working on mapping how other agencies are prioritizing recommendation implementation. And I think as we continue to do outreach on the Use Food Well Washington plan, with a more informed population on what is required, we can then put pressure on. If you think about it as just a big old chessboard, we were tasked with the research and understanding. And now I think we need to go to the decision makers and help them understand this is what we need to succeed, not only for food waste reduction, but a lot of these elements are critical life infrastructure, especially when we look at producers and not revitalizing, but creating a more resilient economy in the wake of a lot of our foreseen impacts in the next couple decades. And so it's very, in my opinion, comprehensive when we look at a lot of factions of what we need to consider in the future. And so, oh, Mary, it looks like it was just a PDF. I didn't see the link. Okay. But to really round out what you're saying, we see the Food Policy Forum as going to be a critical link in helping push this information forward to those decision makers. And so we're working on intersecting the plan as much as we can within that group. And then if you all can help us figure out how to just continue to reach people or continue to share the message, I think that's the theme of this year as we move into moving into action in the next few years. The center is going to help us, especially once it's established in 2024. But until then, I think it's up to us to keep that baton going.
Thank you.
Great. And there's one more question before we wrap it up, and that is, how do you talk to buffet restaurants? That was from Melissa.
Oh, Melissa, this is a tricky one because a lot of them closed in the wake of the pandemic response. I will say we did have a really nice participation from food business and hospitality on our food waste reduction working groups. I know that doesn't really directly answer your question, but we did have a lot of interest groups participating from the food business side of things. I am really curious to see as things open up, though, how a lot of lessons learned have occurred within the pandemic response for especially, I think about buffets sometimes in the casino setting, and I've noticed a lot of casinos, like I live out by Little Creek. It's the fancy restaurant we live by since I'm in rural Mason County. And they've moved from a buffet now to a tabled setting. And so I'm curious to see how that just natural pivot in the wake of the pandemic has created for buffets that maybe have otherwise gone to different business model. And so the short answer is we had a few food businesses on our working groups, and they did represent us, their inputs very well, but long-term, there's a big question about buffets, I think.
And we're also going to be working with the health department to help with getting guidance out to restaurants and food establishments. So we'll be joining partnership with them.
Yeah, a lot of ongoing work yet. We have something to celebrate, but we can't celebrate too much right now.
All right. Mike, would you like to bring us home here?
Yeah, thank you. And oh man, the questions are just stacking up. Before I take us out, I want to also acknowledge that recognizing the educational component of this it just feels so critical. And I'm curious too. We'll have to talk more if you've considered all the food that gets wasted even before it hits the market as a result of, in some cases, stringent wholesale criteria for what's an acceptable food product. But just a huge undertaking and ambitious goals and yeah, very exciting work. And I look forward to continued communication. Well, thank you all for joining us today. Jade, my heart goes out to you for the frog in your throat.
Oh man,
Mary, what a chance.
Mary's the real hero today. I tell you what.
Yeah, it's teamwork, obviously. And Mary, just, you jumped right in there. We certainly appreciate the effort on both of your parts. If there are additional questions, don't hesitate to email Emily or Marty or myself, and we can pass those along and get those answered. We will push something out. The recording will be available. We're currently working on a more formal platform for offering all of that, but we'll be in touch about where this information will be available. And don't forget, on our next Lunch and Learn is scheduled for June 30th. We'll have Mercy will join us from an informal BIPOC leadership team, working on viewing a lot of the food systems work that takes place in Western Washington and elsewhere through an equity lens. So you can look forward to that. And thank you once again for joining us.
Thank you all.